That was a sneak peek into the world today. But first, a focus on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Let's go for developments out of Ukraine this hour. Russia says it will give Ukrainian troops in the Azot chemical plant in Severodonetsk a chance to surrender on Wednesday if they lay down their arms from 8 a.m. local time. Ukraine says its forces are still holding out in Severodonetsk despite destruction on the last bridge between the encircled city and the Ukrainian-held territory. And Russia is also talking about establishing a humanitarian corridor for those trapped at the plant, and that civilians will be able to be transported to the separatist region of Luhansk. The UK's Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says the British government will do what it can to secure the release of 2 Britons sentenced to death by a Russian proxy court in Ukraine. But police in Ukraine are helping to evacuate civilians from the town given as Privilya in eastern Luhansk region while the area was under attack. A video released by the National Police of Ukraine on Monday showed police helping civilians, many of them elderly, who left a basement shelter as shells exploded nearby and packed into vehicles before being driven away. Privilya lies just 20 kilometers to the north of Severodonetsk, which is the scene of a recent severe fighting between Russia and Ukrainian forces. A description accompanying the video on the National Police of Ukraine's Facebook page says officers managed to evacuate 32 civilians in 3 waves during 1 day. Ukraine says its forces are still holding out inside Severodonetsk, trying to evacuate civilians after Russia destroyed the last bridge to the city in a potential turning point in one of the war's bloodiest battles. In the meantime, the Kremlin says it's sure that Russian-backed separatist leaders in the Donbass will be willing to listen to an appeal from Britain over the fate of 2 Britons sentenced to death for fighting for Ukraine. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told reporters in a conference call that London had not contacted Moscow about the issue. A court in the breakaway Donetsk People's Republic in eastern Ukraine last week sentenced Britons Aidan Aslin and Sean Pinner and Moroccan Ibrahim Saldoun to death, saying they were guilty of mercenary activities. Now, their families deny that the trio, who were contracted by the Ukrainian armed forces, were mercenaries. Britain has so far declined publicly to raise the issue with authorities in the DPR. The territory, much of which remains under Ukrainian control, is internationally recognized as part of Ukraine, except by Russia, which considers it an independent state. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says the country will establish a national register for assets that are subject to sanctions or are of unclear origins as part of efforts to make sanctions against Russia more effective. He was speaking at a meeting of the Financial Action Task Force in Berlin. Mr. Scholz added that Russia's aggression against Ukraine has exposed an urgent need to make sanctions more effective, praising the work of the Financial Action Task Force in fighting issues such as money laundering in connection with environmental crime or the financing of right-wing terrorism. Mr. Scholz urged them to intensify their work on global transparency standards. The European Commission has proposed anti-money laundering measures in June 2021, part of which would include the creation of a European anti-money laundering authority.
Russia's aggression.
Let's speak now to the VOA's Anna Chennikova, who's in Kyiv. Anna, great to see you. As always, there's a lot of news flying around today. You have the planned evacuations from Azot, so Russia considering a humanitarian corridor, and then the bridges surrounding Severodonetsk being destroyed. Let's begin from there. The situation in Severodonetsk. What are we learning today about the Russian invasion, which seems to be concentrated in Ukraine's east?
Well, yes, situation in Severodonetsk remains extremely difficult. So basically, no much changes from the past week. Just, very intensive fightings and block by block, building by building. So the fighting sometimes actually even reach the point when there is a fighting for certain building, not a block. We know that Ukrainian forces still control the industrial area and certain building blocks as well. But again, as I already said, situation is changing very quickly, and we can only say that industrial area is definitely under Ukrainian complete control. We know also yesterday in the evening, it was finally confirmed that all the bridges were destroyed by Russian forces, all the bridges that connect basically Severodonetsk. So I would just remind you that there is this huge river that Russian forces are trying to overtake in different parts of Donetsk region, and they do not succeed. So this is exactly the river that basically separates this area. We can say it this way. So now, of course, it's much more difficult without the bridges. It's much more difficult to do any humanitarian aid, logistics, and any medical support to Ukrainian soldiers in particular. But Ukrainian military highlight that there are still ways to go there. So supplies are still coming to Ukrainian soldiers and help as well. But it now takes a bit more time than it used to. So we definitely know that river is used as one of the routes, but other routes are not publicly announced by the military. It keeps secret. But anyway, the city of Severodonetsk is not blocked, so it is still connection with the city, but of course it's much more complicated. In terms of evacuation of civilians, of course, it's now impossible to do it without, a special corridor or whatever. So what we hear today that Russia is accusing again Ukrainian side that they don't want to let people go because, they just suggest that people should go to the uncontrolled territory of Ukraine. Ukrainian side at the same time is agreeing for evacuation, but they want evacuation to happen to the Ukrainian controlled territory because, of course, Ukraine cannot just, let Ukrainians go to, be captured basically, because if they go to uncontrolled territory, it's basically meaning that they're captured. So this is now the point where both sides cannot agree, of course. And it seems that Russian forces do not want to let people go to the Ukrainian control side. What they also suggest that Ukrainian forces should surrender. But again, I would just remind that Ukrainians still control at least 20-25% of Severodonetsk.
Well, that's pretty different from what we're hearing, I think, on the Russian side, the reports about what's going on in Ukraine. Now, President Volodymyr Zelensky did say before he will not be relinquishing any parts of Ukraine. He said that much when the Russian invasion started, of course. Former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger had once suggested a negotiation of territory might help the Ukrainian situation as the war intensifies. Not heard any word from President Zelensky regarding the statement by Mr. Kissinger. Is he still insistent? I mean, President Zelensky, is he still insistent Ukraine will not be given up territory, even though territories are being taken by force by the Ukrainian forces?
Well, not only President Zelensky still insists, but Ukrainian society still insists, because here in Ukraine, everyone are sure that, giving up territories would not help. So giving up territories is just another, creation of this delay that would then lead to another war. So it's not going to help to stop the war forever, because Ukraine understand that in order to prevent any other aggression, possible aggression from Russia in the future, this war should be, won. At least it should be, finished the way that Russia cannot, just go on. And if Ukraine agrees to give up territories and to, froze this conflict once again, it just gonna, this is the understanding here inside. So it's just why I guess President Zelensky also insists on that, because the understanding is that if Ukraine gives up territories, then this would be just frozen conflict for another 5 years, and then Russia would attack again. And this is why for Ukraine it's very important not to, give up, but fight back and fight for every meter of its land. In terms of what you said, capturing while fighting, well, this is war. And of course, there will be territories capturing and then liberated and capturing again and liberated. So this is another story. But giving up territories just to say, okay, let's just stop it and forget and, continue to living peacefully, unfortunately, this is not going to help. And this is not only Ukrainian position, but also a lot of European partners also support this, and especially East European countries, because East European countries have more, understanding of this geopolitical aspect, in long perspective, because they're also quite close to Russia. So I think this is the main point. And when some people and some experts are saying that, okay, Ukraine should give up territory, I think that this is just, a short-term, a short-term answer to this situation. And Ukraine definitely wants to have and to get at the end a long-term and final decision.
And everyone's looking for a final decision. The situation in the Azot plant, as it yesterday, we understand there were some evacuations taking place under heavy gunfire. What do we know today?
Well, we know that for the moment, evacuation of the civilians is very complicated. So I cannot say that evacuation is happening because it's just, fighting going on. So. And this is why this question about corridor appeared. But again, for the moment, it doesn't seem that tomorrow, when, as Russia announced that they would create this corridor from 8 to 8, for the moment, we don't have any confirmation from Ukrainian side, and Ukrainian side already said that they would insist and they want this evacuation to happen to least a chance to the Ukrainian-controlled territory. So unfortunately, for the moment, we know that at the Azot plant, there are around 560 people, civilians, and at least 40 children. And they are stuck there for the moment. So there is no information that anyone had a chance to escape, just because it's too dangerous to escape for the moment.
Let's talk about the two British soldiers who were sentenced in the Russian-speaking court in Ukraine. The UK government says it's doing all it can, and it's exploring all avenues, but might have to go through Ukraine to have those soldiers released. Is the Ukrainian government helping with the negotiations for these Britons to be released, or perhaps serve their sentences somewhere else?
We also have official, announcement from the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs that they are doing everything possible. So I guess that they are a part of this negotiation as well. We also have to remember that according to Ukrainian law, all international soldiers who fight for Ukraine, and this is a special battalion for Ukrainian foreign soldiers as well here in Ukraine. So all the soldiers are considered as Ukrainian soldiers. So basically the same treatment and the same level of protection are also for them, they're also following the same, procedures from the Ukraine in terms of Ukrainian, position. So, so this means that definitely Ukrainian government would protect them as much as Ukrainian soldiers, and this gives a certain, hint that probably these soldiers would also be a part of, maybe exchange or anything like that. So they would be just on the list with the same rights and with the same opportunities as Ukrainian soldiers have. We know that Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs is involved. There is no particular detail on, any negotiations or any even preliminary results or anything like that, because for the moment, it seems like a very behind the door conversation. So we just have certain hints that these soldiers would be treated as Ukrainian soldiers in terms of the law. So I guess that this gives them the same right as Ukrainian soldiers who are captured by Russia and Russian-backed terrorists, just to get a chance to be exchanged and return to Ukraine and to their home countries. So we'll just hope that Ukrainian government will, we'll do everything possible for this to happen, because of course this decision and by so-called court is just another criminal action and another, criminal war crime as it is.
Now, we've been speaking to you for a long time. I mean, since this invasion started, and I know we've talked about, the military aid that Ukraine has been getting, but we're about to talk about food crisis, I mean, after the break, but more than 30%, I think, of Ukrainian land is already, Ukrainian grains have been affected, by this Russian invasion. Crops cannot be harvested and so on. So how is the Ukrainian economy and how are people surviving food-wise?
For the moment, we know that I think that there is a decrease of 30% or so from normal. Ukrainians have a very interesting mentality and very special mentality if we look at it. I should say that Ukrainians still do everything possible to get products ready, and all the procedures are following. And we see, unfortunately, a lot of images that, this farming vehicles and farming techniques are either, got under the shelling or got on the mines and exploded. So there are these tragic situations as well, but this just proves and shows that Ukrainians continue to, do this routine thing in terms of food production despite war. Of course, there are much less, but what we hear for the moment that it should be enough for Ukrainians for the internal use at least. In terms of export, it would be a problem. Well, I mean, not a problem, but it would be more problematic and it would be less for export, this is for sure. But again, Ukrainian farmers are doing everything possible, especially at the territories which are not captured, because if we talk about, for example, Kherson region, and this is a huge territory, farming territory, and a lot of products were coming from Kherson, and from very young age, I remember that all the early products, the earliest products were coming from Kherson because it's the warmest area. So these territories, unfortunately, are lost, and we know that Russian forces just take away this food and just sell it in Russia, or whenever they sell it, like the same as with grains, they just take it. So basically, I mean, just a criminal act again, another criminal act. They just take and sell whenever. So I think that Ukraine will, for this year at least, will have enough. In terms of export, well, much less, but still for the moment, there are no talks that Ukraine would not export at all. So doing everything possible, but again, unfortunately, this sometimes leads to catastrophic situations because of the mines, because also Russian forces are just mine farmer fields.
Anna, thank you so much. Really brave of you to continue to speak with us despite the situation in Ukraine. The rest of the world concerned about a food crisis, not much less talking about the crisis in Ukraine as it affects food production. Thanks again for speaking with us.
Thank you.
The ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict is compounding global food insecurity by pushing up food prices and threatening the harvest in the year to come, according to the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization. Global food security is taking the brunt of the conflict that has lasted for over 100 days. Addressing the opening of the 170th session of the FAO Council in Rome, Italy, Director General Q Dong-yu noted the impact of existing conflicts on food prices and supply chains. He underscored the importance of an open global agri-food trade system that ensure that exports are not impeded or taxed. He called for cooperative actions, including more investment in countries severely affected by the current increase in food prices, and encouraged technological and social innovations to cushion the impact on the food markets.
The implication of the war in Ukraine and other conflicts worldwide on global food security continue to require our holistic analysis, technical approaches, and appropriate actions. The war in Ukraine and other challenges have reduced the export of food, feed, fertilizer, and fuel, leading to the further increase the food prices and put at risk of 2023 harvest.
In the meantime, the World Food Programme says it has suspended some food aid in South Sudan due to the funding shortage heightening the risk of starvation for 1.7 million people. And that move to suspend aid to almost a third of the 6.2 million people in South Sudan the WFP had planned to assist this year comes as global food prices soar amid, of course, the Russia-Ukraine war, leaving humanitarian agencies with funding shortfalls. Climate change has also exacerbated the situation, with South Sudan facing severe flooding, localized droughts, as well as man-made conflict that has left more than 60% of the population grappling with severe hunger.
We had planned to provide food assistance to 6.2 million people this year, but faced with increasing humanitarian needs and insufficient funding, we have taken the painful step to suspend food assistance to 1.7 million people. And these are people that are experiencing emergency and crisis levels of food insecurity, what we call IPC4 and IPC3. We are particularly concerned with these cuts, especially because these cuts are happening at the start of the lean season, when families have completely exhausted any food reserves and are likely to continue to suffer acute levels of hunger as the lean season deepens. Essentially, WFP in South Sudan, we are in famine prevention mode.
Well, staying with the topic, Senior Fellow of the China Association of International Trade, Li Yong, says China is playing an important role in bolstering global food security and supporting agriculture in other developing nations, with the world now at a critical juncture as multiple factors continue to drive up food prices worldwide. Food security is high on the agenda at the 12th World Trade Organization Ministerial Conference, which opened in Geneva on Sunday. At the opening address, Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala called for action at both national and international levels to tackle the growing global food crisis.
This kind of restrictions right now, we have a total account of around 24 countries placing different kind of restrictions on food export, and this is actually going to have bigger than neighbor effects. The Russia-Ukraine conflict and the associated actions, sanctions being taken, and that have virtually prevented the two major food suppliers, from becoming effective supplier. And there are also, restrictions on the trade routes. The more restrictions, being placed on food export, the more severe the food shortage. So the world needs to realize that the situation now is not to really place restrictions. So I think, in the first place, we need to realize that, China used less than 1/9 of the global arable land to feed 1/4 of the global population. And that itself is a a very important role that China plays.
Britain's first scheduled flight taking asylum seekers to Rwanda is set to depart today, with the government warning that anyone who avoids it through last-minute legal challenges will be put on a later plane despite an outcry from critics. UK media has been reporting a plane on the tarmac of the RAF Boscombe in southwest England is the aircraft expected to take the first group of asylum seekers to Rwanda later today. It's just hours now to the flight departure. Lawyer for human rights groups and campaigners have taken their case to the Supreme Court only for the judge to reject it. However, several individuals have successfully argued that they should not be deported to Rwanda on health or humanitarian grounds, meaning the numbers due to depart have dwindled from an original 37 to just 7. Other legal challenges are also ongoing. Britain struck a £120 million deal with Rwanda to send some migrants who had arrived illegally by crossing the channel in small boats from Europe to live in the landlocked African country. Well, as you can imagine, there have been a lot of reactions to the situation, especially today. But Prime Minister Boris Johnson is still sticking to his guns. Today, he said his government will keep going with plans to send those asylum seekers to Rwanda, despite a raft of legal challenges. The first flight is set to take off today, as we said, just hours before. The Prime Minister's Supreme Court rejected a bid from an Iraqi individual to have his deportation blocked, while a handful of others also had their claims dismissed by the High Court in London. An attempt to put an injunction on the flight failed on Monday. But at least 30 others are scheduled to be on the first flight, have successfully argued that they should not be deported to Rwanda on health or humanitarian grounds, as we said earlier. This is what Mr. Johnson said just hours before.
We always said that this was going to be a long process. If you remember when I first announced the policy, I said it would take a long time to get going. There would be plenty of legal challenges, there would be bumps on the road. But I think what opponents of the policy have to say is, well, what is your alternative? What is your alternative to people being shipped across the channel in very frail, unseaworthy dinghies, risking their lives and undermining the rule of law? What's your alternative? We think it's a sensible partnership we've set up with Rwanda. Yes, it may take a while to get working properly, but it doesn't mean we're not going to keep going. I think it is very important that we continue to show the people traffickers that their business case is going to lead, is being undermined, and that they're cheating people, and they're not only risking their lives, sending them across the sea in unseaworthy vessels, as I say, but they're also running the risk of them being sent to another country which they hadn't bargained for, and they're fundamentally ripping them off. And that's the message we need to get across to those people traffickers.
Our London correspondent Juliana Lanca has been following this story. She joins us now. Juliana, the Prime Minister sounds like he's doing those asylum seekers a favour, saying that they could have been sent to another country. But is Rwanda really the best choice, though? And what's the mood in Britain, you know, as we speak? Has the flight left? I'm sorry, I have so many questions to start with, and I hope you can stay with me. Has the flight left? What's the mood in Britain? And why does the Prime Minister sound like, you know, he's doing those asylum seekers a favour?
Good afternoon. Well, there's a huge story here in Britain, and I think it's really because this Conservative government are a government who have centred and shaped most of its policy, including getting Brexit done, around migration and illegal migration. Yes, you do have vast amounts of people, including campaign groups, the Archbishop of Canterbury, as well as Prince Charles, coming out vocally to condemn this appalling act, but there are potentially the silent majority in Britain that are pretty glad with what is likely to take place today. It isn't over yet. We know that there are still legal complaints sitting in the Court of Appeal. I know about 4 of them, so about 7 individuals are due to be heading on that flight, leaving from Boscombe Down in Wiltshire today. 4 of them have had their last-minute appeals rejected by the High Court. 3 are still ongoing. We're expecting an announcement by the judge within the next 2 to 3 hours. But as Prime Minister Boris Johnson said, what is the alternative? And I think that is where critics of this £120 million deportation scheme are failing to come up short. It was signed, just to go back and give it some context, in Kigali, the Rwandan capital, by the Home Secretary Priti Patel in April. This scheme is for 5 years. And what it basically will do is anybody that travels into Britain via the channel, whether you are on a dinghy or whether you go into the back of a lorry, you will be sent to Rwanda. And when you get to Rwanda, your asylum case will be seen there. So there is no confirmation as of yet whether or not these individuals will be given home in Rwanda. They may have their claims rejected and they may be sent back to their country of origin. Lots of people have condemned this scheme because they consider it to be human trafficking. Lots of depictions as well of Rwanda have been seen to be a little bit xenophobic. So it is a really confusing time, and it is happening, Amarachi, on the 5th anniversary of the Grenfell Tower fire, where 74 people were killed. It was a horrible fire that took place in Kensington, West London. And the vast majority of the people who died in that fire were people that had settled from many of these countries where these refugees are coming from. So as, the Archbishop of Canterbury did say, it is a shameful policy that they feel does shame Britain. And whether or not the Prime Minister has to change the law, which he said he will do. He said that he is going to change the law to ensure that any of these leftist lawyers, as he calls them, who try to appeal this deportation, they won't be able to do so because the law will be changed.
I think at this point I have to ask Juliana, why won't Britain process the asylum seekers? Why won't they determine who deserves to stay in the UK and who deserves to leave?
It's a good question, Amarachi, and I think this is one of the reasons why Home Secretary Priti Patel receives so much hate, especially because, as you can see, she is of Asian or African, as she says, descent, because her family are originally from Kenya. They came into the UK when she was a young child, and look, she's become Home Secretary. Nadine Zahawi, who is the Education Secretary, one of the most senior ministers in Britain, he was once a refugee from Iraq. Why are the Conservative government deciding to do this when so many of us, including me, must I say, have benefited from migrating into Britain? Also, as well, I think what a lot of the charity organisations are saying too is they're comparing it to, the Homes for Ukraine scheme, where we did see that tens of thousands of British families welcomed Ukrainians into this country. They opened their homes. Why are people in Britain not given an opportunity to do that? And we could even widen this out. We can talk about people that want to come into the UK from Nigeria. Why is the government only allowing certain people to come into this country? Some would say that it is a downright racism. I think that's what a lot of critics have said. But I think there is a real issue here, and the real issue has got to be the relationship between France and Britain. Today alone, 250 migrants crossed into Britain from France via the Channel. They had to be rescued by Navy officials. This year alone, 10,000 people have made that dangerous crossing. Last year, 28,000. Clearly, something is wrong. Clearly, there's a breakdown of communication between Priti Patel and her French counterpart. We know that in the past, tens of thousands, in fact, tens of millions, must I correct myself, of taxpayers' money has been issued to the French government to try and prevent individuals from coming into this country. They still want to come. But I think now, if you take away all of the legal ramblings and you just go down to morals and ethics, I think the vast majority of people do believe that this is morally and ethically wrong. The only problem is trying to find a solution to stop these illegal gangs, because they are illegal gangs at the centre of this. I think people that are desperately fleeing whatever circumstances they're coming into Britain for are paying some of these human traffickers, you know, tens of thousands of pounds to get here. So that clearly needs to stop. So I don't think anybody could say the government is wrong in doing so. But sending them over to Rwanda, is that the right choice? Many people think so.
Well, it does seem that Britain is borrowing, you know, a leaf from what the European Union did during the 2015 migrations into Europe. They sort of outsourced, you know, the processing of asylum seekers and all of that to Greece and I think to Turkey. And then they provided African countries, announced they would provide in African countries billions of euros to help keep, you know, their citizens back in. But that is difficult, isn't it? Because people do migrate for different reasons. The problem really is how they're migrating. But it appears, you know, this announcement has been on for a few weeks now. You mentioned, you know, the crossing of the English Channel, which happened just a while ago. I think it happened earlier today. And it does seem that there is no deterrence, however, to people crossing the channels. So perhaps the problem really is, you know, probably with France not stopping people making that crossing, or the UK having to send them back.
Well, gosh, you know, you've touched on a really good point, and it's become highly politicised. And we know that Emmanuel Macron and Prime Minister Boris Johnson are not necessarily the best of friends. There has been a war of words over this issue for several years now. And of course, it's only become more complicated because of Brexit and the fact that French fishermen have been in a long-running dispute with a British fisherman. So yes, I think it's really difficult to ascertain why exactly, you know, the French coastal guards are allowing these migrants to leave, because clearly they are allowing the migrants to leave. Certainly they can't have officials at every single metre of the beach, but we know exactly where they're coming from, and they are coming in their droves. Like I said, 250 people came today. Yesterday there were 150 people, and these numbers keep on soaring. But I think what is being quite interesting, particularly for those living in Britain that are of African heritage, is the description of Rwanda. You know, Rwanda, of course, have a very troubled history, and no less than, of course, what happened in the 1994 genocide. But, you know, there has been some utterings of xenophobism when it comes to how Britain and British charities are, you know, talking about Africa, saying that a lot of these migrants would rather kill themselves than settle in Africa, particularly in Rwanda. So I think, you know, the conversation is layered in so many different issues, how people perceive Africa and settling there and living their life there, why people were deciding not to stop in France and continue on to Britain, how Britain is prioritising migrants, whether it's by a point-based system, whether it's by the colour of their skin or their nationality, and why France appear to be allowing people to take these dangerous journeys, perilous journeys, knowing that so many of them are risking their lives. But, you know, the flight is due to depart at 10:30 in the evening. I expect there will be hundreds of protesters there. The media did release the address of the landing strip a few hours ago, so I'm sure loads of people will be there. 7 people due to take leave on that flight at a cost of £100,000 per person, Amarachi. £100,000 per person, just 7 individuals on a flight that can carry 200 people. It is absolutely shocking, especially when you think that the UK is going through a cost of living crisis where people are struggling to pay their bills, but the government believe that nearly £1 million on sending just 7 people to Rwanda is good value for money.
Well, £100,000 is a lot. That could do a lot for many Britons in the UK, as well as help to resettle some of those Ukrainian migrants who are coming into the country. Juliana, thank you again. Your analysis quite on point with all of the topics. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Just before we go on the break, more context to what Juliana was talking about the arrival of those migrants crossing the English Channel today. Amongst them were babies and children. They were amongst the dozens who arrived at the port of Dover. They came as Britain prepares, of course, to send the first flight of asylum seekers to Rwanda later today. As we understand, flight takes off at 10:30. That plan, however, has horrified political opponents, charities, and religious leaders who say it's inhumane. The United Nations refugee chief called it catastrophic. The entire leadership of the Church of England denounced it as an immoral policy that shames Britain. Media reporters said Prince Charles and has privately described the plan as appalling. Jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny has been transferred from his prison colony to an unknown location, according to a press officer today. Kira Yamish tweeted that Navalny had been taken from penal colony number 2 in Pokrov, some 74 miles east of Moscow, and that, in his words, we do not know where Alexei is now and what colony they are taking him to. Yamish says he only found out about Navalny's apparent relocation when his lawyer was told at a prison checkpoint that there was no such convict there. Russia's highest profile opposition leader over the last decade was jailed for 2.5 years for parole violations in February 2021 after returning from Germany, where he had been recovering from an apparent nerve agent poisoning in Russia that he accuses the Kremlin of ordering. On March 24th, Navalny was sentenced to a further 9 years in prison for fraud and contempt of court. The opposition leader says the charges against him are fabricated and aimed at thwarting his political ambitions. The judge ordered Navalny, who has lambasted Russia's military campaign in Ukraine as stupid, be transferred to a maximum security prison where his rights to visits and correspondence will be reduced. French President Emmanuel Macron has implored on voters to give him a majority in the second round of parliamentary elections just before he jetted off for Romania and Moldova. Mr. Macron says the war in Ukraine has sown disorder in all aspects of life, including the economy and daily life, warning of tough times ahead as the conflict continues for a 4th month. Macron will express France's solidarity with its European allies sharing a border with Ukraine, and thus are most exposed to the war. He'll also visit French troops in Romania today and then go on to Moldova tomorrow. Hundreds of South Koreans have staged a demonstration in Seoul showing their support for truck drivers who are on strike demanding higher pay amid a global surge of fuel prices. Holding candles, around 200 participants from various civic and labor groups and a few other truckers gathered in front of the presidential office in Yongsan as talks between the government and truckers are set to resume this evening local time. A truckers union which is protesting against soaring food prices and demanding guarantees of minimum pay has vowed to continue the strike after 4 rounds of talks with the government failed to find a resolution. A strike is a major test for South Korea's new conservative president Yoon Suk-yeol, facing the risk of eroding his support, distracting him from his agenda and sowing the seeds of long-term antagonism with powerful unions. Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi has met with his Palestinian counterpart Mohammed Shater in the West Bank city of Ramallah, signing bilateral cooperation agreements. The agreements in the fields of pediatric surgery, agriculture, youth employment, and the protection of cultural heritage amount to a total £10 million. Mr. Draghi's visit comes after Shater met with the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who said that hundreds of millions of euros in European funds to support the Palestinian territories can be paid out following the resolution of problems that have blocked their release. Draghi, who's on a 2-day visit to the region, met earlier with Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett in Jerusalem to discuss what the two leaders said were regional issues as well as Russia's invasion of Ukraine. While Lebanon is preparing to offer a compromise to U.S. energy envoy Amos Hochstein to resolve a dispute with Israel over maritime gas resources, Hochstein landed in Beirut on Monday at the invitation of the Lebanese government, which had objected to the arrival of a vessel operated by London-based Energean off the Mediterranean coast on June 5th to develop a gas field known as Karish. Israel says Karish is part of its exclusive economic zone, but Lebanon says the field is in contested waters and should not be developed until both countries conclude their indirect talks to delineate their maritime borders. A Cambodian court handed down jail sentences to about 60 opposition figures, including prominent lawyer Thierry Sang, for conspiring to commit treason in a mass trial condemned by the United States and rights groups as politically motivated. Thierry Sang had arrived at court dressed as a Statue of Liberty with a symbolic chain around her, saying she expected to be found guilty, also adding her verdict would apply to all Cambodians who love justice, who love freedom, who are genuine Democrats. After the verdict was announced, Thierry Sang was bundled into a police pickup truck outside court, sparking scuffles between officers and her supporters. She's not been allowed into court due to her attire. Her lawyer says she would consider appealing. Notice she and other co-defendants have been sentenced to between 5 to 8 years in prison.
It follows the logic of this autocratic regime to find me guilty. But I am freedom today. I am Lady Liberty. So it won't just be me, Thierry Sang, who will be found guilty, but all the Cambodians who love justice, who love freedom, who are genuine Democrats, who will be found guilty along with us. This autocratic regime is suppressing the Cambodian people. It is suppressing freedom. It is persecuting Cambodians for their political opinion.
Watching a 6-year-old young girl dressed in a white dress and wrapped in a Ukrainian flag. Solomia Rut is her name. She performed the Eurovision winning song Stefania by the Ukrainian group Kalush Orchestra as she's at one of the cities in Ukraine trying to raise money, she says, for the Ukrainian military in Dnipro. Passers-by have been dropping donations into Somia's collection box. Her mother, Ksenia Rot, says the money she raises will go towards first aid equipment, bulletproof vests, a drone, a portable solar power plant, stretchers, blankets, and medicine for the military. It is charming and heartbreaking at the same time. She really didn't have to do this if, of course, the Russian invasion had not happened. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you again later.